Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Shift Church. If this is your first time here, we would love it if you would scan this QR code, and if you fill out the Connect card, we'll send you some free Opus coffee. And make sure you check out that Meet with Joe option, because then you can enjoy that cup of Joe with Joe Smith himself, and you can ask any and all questions that you want or need to know about Shift. Easter is in 2 weeks, and we love celebrating what that means with all of you. Aww. If you would like to help out at all, please scan this QR code, check all the options that you're interested in, and a leader will contact you. Westminster is also doing an Easter egg hunt on Easter. They'll have snack and a story time at 10:30, and the actual Easter egg hunt will be at 11. So the Treehouse kids will go outside at 11, enjoy it, have all that fun stuff, and then come back in and go right back to our regularly scheduled program. It's gonna be a ton of fun, so don't miss out. And that's all for today, so let's jump into week 3 of Easter Unveiled.
As a child, I loved Easter. The Easter baskets, the Easter bunny, all the little trinkets and stuff that came with it, the egg hunts, all the chocolate. I love chocolate. I mean, I love me some chocolate, but you can keep the milk chocolate. I love dark chocolate, and I mean, I could swim in that stuff all day, right? Then I got a little older and had to go to sunrise services, and I get the meaning of it now, like I understand the significance, but then as a kid, it was like, wait a minute, you're telling me that you're gonna wake me up even earlier so that I can go to church an extra hour? Just somebody kill me now. And then I started working in the church, and I really came to like loathe Easter. All this time and planning and resources and everything kind of going into a 1 hour program, which was meant to celebrate the pinnacle of Christianity, but it also became like this huge marketing scheme thing where you'd plan all this extravagant whatever and all of this stuff just to get people to come back next week. It was like our Super Bowl. And then I was deconstructing, and I didn't know what to do with Easter. I didn't know what I thought about it, and I definitely didn't know how to teach it. So if you've been part of Shift for the past 2 years, then you know that when I taught about it, I taught what it wasn't rather than what it was, which is why I think we landed on this series where each week we're kind of collectively looking at Easter and the cross and re-examining it and asking what does it mean. So we're just going to jump right into it today. So if you're new online, my name is Joe. I'm the lead pastor here at Shift, and we're in a series called Easter Unveiled. And each week we're taking a look at the cross and a different meaning and asking, what does this mean? Week 1 was the eternal moment of forgiveness, that in some sort of metaphysical way that Jesus absorbed all the disease of humanity and kind of healed it. He pressed all of his divinity into our diseased humanity so that we could then live in his healed humanity. In week 2, last week, we looked at the icon of the invisible God. We saw that ancient peoples across all civilizations had this different pantheon of gods and goddesses, but they all had one in common, regardless of where they were, and it was the supreme God. It was like a war horse or thunderbolt God. The supreme God was one to be greatly feared, and they also created idols to connect with these gods. But when we create our gods, they tend to look like we do. They look like us, they think like us, they love like us, and most dangerously, they hate like us. Beware the gods that hate the same people that you do. So when we ask, what does God look like? We only need to look at the cross of Jesus. That is what God has always looked like and will always look like. We didn't know it then, but we do now. And so today we look at the cross and ask, what does this mean? And it means the remaking of the world. In the Gospel of John, we see that Jesus has entered Jerusalem a few days before Passover. And normally Jerusalem had a population of about 25,000 people. But during that Passover period, it would balloon upwards of like 100,000 people. And in John 12, we see some Greeks that had come to worship. They were people, Greek-speaking people that hadn't converted yet, but followed God. And they reached out to one of the disciples and asks if they could see Jesus, and Jesus gets word. And then he has the strangest response in verse 31. He says, Jesus answered them, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Jesus had been telling his disciples about what was coming, and they either couldn't or wouldn't believe it. But he tells them again, and it's almost time, tells them that it's almost time. He's going to be crucified and die. And if we go down just a few verses, we see the only place in all four gospels where Jesus gives us reasons for the crucifixion. Verse 31, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. Jesus says that in his crucifixion, the world will be judged and the ruler will be driven out. Now, we'll talk about those two things next week when we look at overthrow of the accusers. So just set those aside. Jesus says something so deeply profound that if we're not careful, we will move right past it. He says that when he is lifted up, when he is crucified, when he's glorified, that he will draw all people to him. And that word draw is literally means drag. It's the word helko in Greek. And it literally means to drag. It's the same word used when earlier the Apostle Peter was fishing and had to drag nets full of fish ashore. There is something that takes place at the crucifixion where all of humanity is dragged, drawn to Jesus. Something so significant taking place here, something found only in deep time, that in essence, it remakes the world. And the story is there if we just look at it. So to see the remaking of the world, we must travel back to the primeval original making. And let me just say this before we move on, that literalism is the least helpful of all interpretive tools. It's least helpful because you get so caught up in, is the story, is it literally true? Asking that, you will miss the message. The story of creation has many meanings, and this is just one of them. In the beginning, we see Adam, humankind, or Adam, and life, Chava, or Eve. Humankind and life give birth to two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain was of those that settled and worked the land. They brought forth agriculture and with it civilization. Abel was of the nomadic class, going here and there wherever the grass was greenest, and a conflict arose between the two. Anthropologists tell us this as well. And the dispute was over land. Can land be owned? And if so, then who can own it? And in the very first battlefield, Cain rose up and murdered his brother. He lied to himself. Abel is not my brother. He is my enemy. He is the other. And then he lied to God. I don't know where he is. Um, am I my brother's keeper? Cain was exiled and left with a mark that kept anyone from attacking him, but he was never able to return. And Cain went east of Eden and founded the first city, Enoch. And don't miss this, because this is what the story is trying to tell us. Cain made, founded, and formed the first city with violent power. Every civilization since has been patterned after this. Civilization is run and ruled by those with violent power, the power to kill. And this idea is so prevalent that most of us can't even imagine a world that isn't this way. And that's why we say, this is just the way it is. This is the way the world is. What are you going to do about it? It just is. Oh, I mean, I think we'll hide it, right? Keep it in the background. But left to our own, we have the tendency to trust in warhorse gods, gods that look like us, think like us, love like us, and most dangerously, hate like us. The world becomes centered around this axis of evil, of violent power, and the power to kill. And this ancient lie soon gives rise to every empire this world has ever seen. Assyria, Egypt, Babylon, Rome, England, France, Spain, the United States, the Soviet Union, China, all built and sustained in the image of Cain. I mean, Rome's where this story takes place, in the Roman Empire. Rome's origin story is about two brothers, Romulus and Remus. They have a conflict, and Romulus kills Remus and names a city after himself, Roma. Or how about Lord of the Rings? The story of Smeagol and Deagol. Smeagol, who later becomes Gollum, kills his brother Deagol because Deagol found the ring of power and Smeagol wanted it. These are the foundational myths we tell ourselves that remind us of the making of this fallen world. So when Adam, humankind, and life, Chava, broke community with God, it set humanity on a trajectory that would lead to destruction. God saw what was becoming of humanity and with broken heart said, Behold the man. Look at what is becoming of humanity. Behold the man. Now we'll hear that phrase again, but it's separated by eons. What was once spoken by God is now uttered by a Roman governor named Pontius Pilate during the questioning of Jesus of Nazareth. Pontius was the fifth governor of the Roman province of Judea, serving under Emperor Tiberius, which I absolutely love that name. But if I can come back and do it all over again, I'm going to go by Emperor Tiberius Smith. I think it's got a nice ring to it. Anyway, he was frustrated with his position in the government. He had higher aspirations than ruling over this backwater town with its like really meddlesome, quarrelsome population. And he doesn't care about their ideologies and their arguments. He certainly doesn't like being woken up in the middle or early to deal with their priests. And I picture him constantly stressed. So I kind of found a picture that looks like him, and I think it kind of looks like this. Matthew McConaughey right there. I just like he's stressed out and he's smoking, not in the cool like Jamesy kind of way, but just like got that sucker up there and just inhaling all of it, right? Now he normally lived in the town of Caesarea on the coast, but during Passover he stayed in the compound built by King Herod, Herod the Great in Jerusalem, because Passover is a celebration of Jewish liberation. If there was ever going to be an uprising, an insurrection, it was going to be during this time period. He doesn't want to be here, and he doesn't want to get in the middle of another religious argument. So after the trial and arrest of Jesus, the religious leaders bring Jesus to Pontius Pilate because they don't have the authority to put someone to death. That power belongs only to Rome. He brings Jesus into his chambers and he takes a big drag on that cigarette and asks, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. You wouldn't understand my kingdom. It's my power doesn't come from violence. Rome can't fathom my power. You have no idea what I'm talking about. And so Pilate says, So you are a king? Jesus responds, If you say so. And then he says, For this I was born, and for this I come into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Then Pilate asks, What is truth? Flogging. Jesus is taken into the praetorium where the guards are roused. What did this guy do? I don't know. I heard that he's claiming to be some sort of king. The guards had grown accustomed to desensitized to the extreme and grotesque violence. And they decided for some reason to have fun with this prisoner. And so after the flogging, somebody says, Hey, wait, didn't this guy say he was a king? What's a king without a crown? And so somebody fashions a crown of thorns and places it on his head. And another person says, Hey, what's a king without their scepter? So they go find a rod, it's a reed rod. And before they hand it over, they beat him. They beat his head with it. And then somebody else says, Hey, I have the perfect thing for this. And they run and they grab a robe made of purple, purple material, purple being the color of royalty, and they place it over his shoulders and they bow before him and mockingly yell, Hail to the king, hail to the king. And this morbid scene, intended as mockery, was not ended up being not the mockery that they thought it would be. It was, in fact, the true coronation of the King of Kings. And that makes no sense. This weakness could not be any kind of power unless we remember last week that it is God's weakness that is power. It is in the non-violent resistance of Jesus that he takes on the mantle of king. And while sickening and evil, true, it is also the beginning of the remaking of the world. He is brought before Pilate again, where he yells out to the crowd, Behold the man, iduha anthropos. Those words, spoken with a broken heart so long ago by God in the garden, behold the man, now come from the lips of the Roman Judean governor as a proclamation of Rome's violent power, idu ha anthropos. And he gives the crowd and religious leaders another chance, and they choose an insurrectionist over Jesus. In their lust for continued power, they choose the way of Cain, the way of empire. They yell back, he claims to be the Son of God. Now, Pilate is from a world with a pantheon of gods and goddesses, and that grabs his attention and kind of gives him some trouble because maybe, right? So he brings Jesus back in and asks, "Where are you from?" And Jesus doesn't respond. And Pilate says, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify? Don't you know that I have the power to give you freedom? I have the power to kill you." Earlier, Pilate had asked Jesus, "What is truth?" And in this statement, he answers his own question. The truth of Rome and every empire since the making of that first city is built on the ancient lie of Cain that the world must be ruled by and structured by those with the power to kill. And Jesus responds, "You don't understand true power or where it comes from." And to his credit, Pilate tries to release him a few more times, but the crowd and religious leaders accuse him of being no friend to Caesar. At this, he brings Jesus out before this satanic mob disguised as leaders of God's people and yells, "Here is your king. Shall I crucify him?" And pay special attention to what he said, to what is said next. The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." And then he handed him over to them to be crucified. We have no king but Caesar. The chief priests, the leaders, ordained, set apart, separated to lead this peculiar people of God, deny God in the flesh and pledge allegiance to the empire, to the way of Cain. This ancient lie of Cain is still relevant today. Good and moral people still under the sway of the warhorse gods. They still believe the lie that our world must be centered around those with the power to kill. And I've heard people say this. They will say, and I'm sure you have too, they will say, "We're not electing a pastor. This is just the way it is." And I truly believe this is one of the reasons why the early church leader Paul wrote in his letter to the Roman church in Romans 12, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world. The pattern is that of Cain and every empire since the making of our world." Hear me when I say this. A Christianity reliant on political and religious strongmen for protection and survival has lost its faith in Jesus as its savior. They still look at divine love and scream, "We have no king but Caesar." Watch. Watch how the evangelical church responds to this presidential election this year. Be honest in your observations. Measure the responses coming from people claiming Christ against the fruit of the Spirit and the flesh. Do the policies and the person bringing them produce more love or hate, joy or despair, peace or anxiety, kindness or rage? Listen, I do not want the church leading the country at all. I completely believe in the separation of church and state. But if a political party and its leaders are claiming to be the party of Christians, then they should exhibit the traits of Jesus. Otherwise, it's still the same evil conglomeration of religion and empire that conspire to murder Jesus. Jesus is then lifted up to be crucified, to be glorified. And in doing so, begins to drag, begins to draw, to woo all people to him. This is the remaking of the world. Jesus exposes the grotesque violence in Cain's lie and remakes the world around an axis of cruciform love. No longer is it centered the violent power of Cain and empire. We're being drawn, pulled by the gravity of unconditional forgiving love. Of course, I mean, let's be honest. Of course, you can resist this pull. We resist this grace all the time. We still experience the fallout of Cain's lie. There is war and poverty. We here in the United States prioritize the machines of war in our national budget to the detriment of us all. Humanity continues to live from a position of scarcity rather than of abundance. There's plenty for everyone, yet we choose to hoard resources. We abuse and lie and cheat. People treated as things to be used and then just discarded. And we do all of that at our own peril. It's when we resist this grace and continue to live in Cain's lie that we create our own self-imposed hell. We choose to be the big brother, standing on the outside of the party as the celebration rages on for the prodigal son. The world isn't just this way anymore. It's this way because we allow it to be this way. The world no longer revolves around an axis of violent power. It has been remade to revolve around an axis of cruciform love. Let us look upon the cross of Christ and see it for what it is. It is the undoing of Cain's primeval lie. And in the undoing, the world is remade, reborn. I want to invite you into the process of your own undoing. And I would love to sit and talk with anyone in that process, or how to even engage in that. If you're asking, what does that even mean? And I believe that this is what salvation is, what the symbol of baptism is. It is the dying to the ego. This is the death that we all must experience to enter our salvation. It is the death, burial, and resurrection, our own undoing and remaking. It is understand this, it is entering a lifetime of death, burial, and resurrection, or order, disorder, and reorder. Or as Paul puts it, it's us being saved. And I would invite any that are searching to look at the universal Christ and feel the pull toward love and grace and experience the forgiveness that's already there, to remember the truth that your soul already knows, that at your very core, the deepest parts of you are not opposed to God, but are aligned with God. This undoes the ancient lie of Cain that the world is centered on, built on. This is the remaking of the world. If you're new, we end each gathering with a time of reflection. And we do that to allow you time to listen to your body and to listen to the Spirit. The band, if you're in person, normally comes back up. Going on in person. We'll have some music playing in the background, so it's not an awkward silence. We'll have a meadow picture on the screen come up to help create some intimacy. And then I'll ask a few questions to guide that process. And then I will pray for us. And each week, we end here at Shift, we end each week with communion. And when we take that little symbol of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, we use it to reflect on what we've heard that day. And so today, if you do so, let it remind you that we are no longer under the lie of Cain, that the world has been remade. So my first question for you is this. As you listen to this story, what came to mind? What do you need to pay attention to? Where has this ancient lie created violence, physical or otherwise, in your life? How do you begin to undo the consequences of the lie of Cain in your life and allow the Christ to remake it? And my final question is this. If you have not entered your own undoing, what is stopping you? What fear is holding you back? Let's pray. Cruciform God, we are thankful this lie no longer holds power over us. I pray for your spirit to move amongst all people and help them see that truth as well, that the world has been remade. I ask that Shift as a community would participate in that remaking, that we would enter our own undoing and set down our need to be right or correct, to step outside of our own closed systems and find the other. Break our hearts and egos and give us the strength to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. May the things that need to die, die, and the things that need to live be reborn. Give us eyes to see and ears to hear. Bring comfort to the afflicted, healing to the broken, and freedom to the chained. In your name, amen. Well, thanks for joining along in our impromptu online-only re-recording of this morning's gathering. Don't forget, next week we'll be back in person and have all of the band and everything. It'll be awesome. Yeah, thanks for following along, everybody. I hope that you have a beautiful week. Now, you all get out of here. Go love on some people.